The sky above the Shinjuku district in Tokyo did not just turn dark. It shattered like a mirror dropped on a stone floor, and the sound was louder than thunder, as a jagged crack of orange energy tore open the night clouds. Rain fell hard and cold, mixing with the glowing sparks that spilled from the wound in the air, while people on the busy streets below stopped walking and looked up in terror. Cars slammed on their brakes and caused accidents in the middle of the intersections because nobody was watching the road anymore. This was not a normal storm, and everyone could feel it deep in their bones like a sudden drop in temperature that made them shiver. High above the tallest glass buildings, a man in a blue robe and a red cape tumbled out of the burning crack in the sky, and he fell fast toward the wet concrete of a skyscraper roof. Stephen Strange tried to stop his fall by waving his hands to create a shield of magic, but the energy sputtered and died like a wet match. He crashed onto the roof of the building and rolled across the hard surface until he hit a metal vent with a loud thud. He groaned in pain and tried to stand up, but his body felt heavier than usual, as if gravity pulled harder in this place. He looked at his hands and saw they were shaking, not just from his old injuries, but from a strange weakness that drained his power. The cloak on his back moved slowly and wrapped around his shoulders to comfort him, but even the magical cloth seemed tired and dim. Strange looked up at the sky, where the crack was slowly closing, and he realized with a sinking feeling that the door he had fallen through was sealed shut. He was trapped. Strange stood up and walked to the edge of the roof to look down at the city. It looked like his world, with bright neon signs and busy trains, but the feeling was wrong. The air tasted stale and metallic. He reached for the eye of Agamotto, which hung around his neck, and opened it to see the truth of this place. Green light usually flowed from the time stone to show him the past or the future, but here the stone pulsed with a sickly grey rhythm. Through the magic of the eye, he looked at the thousands of people running on the streets below and gasped. He did not see their souls or their futures. Instead, he saw numbers floating in red light above their heads. There were clocks counting down to the second they would die. Every single person had a visible expiration date, and it horrified him. He realized he had not landed in a different country, but in a different reality, where death was the strongest force of all. Across the city in a quiet bedroom, a young student named Light Yagami sat at his desk. He was writing names in a black notebook. He heard the boom of the sky breaking and stood up to look out his window. He saw the fading orange light above the distant buildings. Light narrowed his eyes and felt a surge of annoyance because he believed he was the god of this new world. He thought he was the only one who had the power to judge people and control life and death. The explosion in the sky felt like a challenge to his rule. He watched the distant roof where the strange man had landed. Light turned his head slightly to look behind him. A tall monster with spiky hair and big yellow eyes floated in the corner of the room, holding a red apple. The monster was a Shinigami named Ryuk. Ryuk laughed a low raspy sound that rattled in his throat. He told Light that something very interesting had just fallen into their playground. Light did not laugh. He picked up his pen and stared at the figure in the distance. He wondered if he could kill a man who fell from the sky just by writing a name. Back on the roof, Strange felt a cold shiver run down his spine. It was the feeling of being watched by a predator. He closed the eye of Agamotto and raised his hands to cast a spell of protection. He drew a circle in the air, and this time a small spark of orange line appeared. It was weak, but it was there. He knew he had to leave this roof immediately. He did not know the rules of this universe yet, but he knew that the natural laws here were hostile to his kind of magic. The shadows on the roof seemed to stretch toward him like long, dark dark fingers. He needed to find a place to hide and study the energy of this world before it consumed him. Strange jumped from the roof, and his cape caught the wind, allowing him to glide down into the dark alleyways of Tokyo. He disappeared into the shadows, but the balance of the world had already shifted. The rules had been broken. A sorcerer who fought to save lives had entered a world where a human boy was killing people with a pen. The collision had begun, and the city was already paying the price for their meeting. The rain in Tokyo felt acidic against the skin of Stephen Strange as he leaned heavily against the damp brick wall of a narrow alleyway in Shinjuku. He had fought interdimensional demons and bargained with gods who ate entire timelines, but this world felt distinctively hostile in a quiet and suffocating way. The air was thick with a psychic weight that tasted like ash and iron. He tried to summon the crimson bands of Sitarak to bind a loose dumpster that had blown over in the wind, just to test his dexterity, but the red energy manifested as a slow, sluggish sludge that dripped from his fingers before dissipating into smoke. His connection to the Vishanti was severed, or at least severely dampened by a layer of metaphysical interference he had never encountered before. This universe did not want him here, and it was actively suppressing his presence like an immune system attacking a virus. Strange forced himself to breathe rhythmically and centered his mind. He needed information before he could formulate an escape plan. He adjusted his high collar to hide his face and stepped out of the shadows into the neon glare of the street. The sensory assault was immediate. Enormous screens mounted on the sides of glass skyscrapers flashed with frantic news reports and the faces of serious men in suits debating morality and justice. The speakers blared the name Kira over and over again. It was a chant that seemed to pulse in time with the heartbeat of the city. Strange walked through the crowd and noticed the way people moved. They were terrified but also obedient. They kept their heads down and avoided eye contact. It was a population living under the constant threat of an invisible executioner. He needed to understand the local laws of reality, so he found a quiet corner near a vending machine and performed a minor cantrip of perception. It cost him a headache that felt like a nail being driven into his temple, but it worked. His vision shifted. The physical world became translucent, and the spiritual undercurrents revealed themselves. What he saw made his stomach turn. The entire city was draped in a web of black necrotic energy. It was not the chaotic evil of the dark dimension, but a rigid, bureaucratic form of death. He saw thin, jagged lines connecting certain individuals to a void he could not see. As he watched, a man in a business suit walking 10 feet away, suddenly stopped. The man clutched his chest, and his eyes rolled back in his head. The red numbers floating above his head, which Strange had seen earlier, rapidly counted down to 0. 0 meant the end. The man collapsed onto the wet pavement, and the crowd gasped and recoiled. Strange did not move to help him medically, because he could see the spiritual cause. A dark spectral claw had reached down and crushed the man's heart. It was a precise surgical strike from a distance. This was not natural disease. This was murder by magic. Strange knelt by the body as the crowd formed a circle. He placed a hand on the man's chest and tried to trace the energy signature back to its source. Usually, magic left a trail like a breadcrumb path, but this energy was different. It was written. It felt like ink drying on paper. The connection snapped the moment the man died, leaving Strange with nothing but a cold sensation on his fingertips. He stood up and realized that the crowd was not looking at the dead man anymore. They were looking at him. His clothes were strange, and he had just touched a victim of Kira. Whispers spread through the onlookers. Some took out their phones and started recording. Strange realized his mistake. In a world ruled by fear of the supernatural, a sorcerer stood out like a beacon. He turned on his heel and walked away quickly, melting into the flow of pedestrians before the police could arrive. He needed a place to think. He needed a library. Miles away in the suburb of Kanto Light, Yagami sat in his darkened room, illuminated only by the glow of his computer monitors. The multiple screens displayed police databases, international news feeds, and encrypted chat logs. Light was calm. He peeled a slice of apple and ate it slowly, while his eyes scanned the data. The explosion in Shinjuku had been categorized as a freak meteorological event by the authorities, but Light knew better. He had seen the footage from a traffic camera before the government scrubbed it. A man had fallen from the sky. Light did not believe in aliens, but he believed in threats. Ryuk lay on the bed behind him, chuckling at the ceiling. Ryuk asked Light if he was worried about the visitor. Light replied that he was not worried, but he was cautious. If this person had powers, it could be a problem. If this person was the investigator sent by some foreign agency, it was a challenge. Light zoomed in on a blurry frame of the video, where the man's cape seemed to move on its own. Light smiled. He picked up his pen and opened the death note. He did not have a name yet, but he was patient. He prided himself on his intellect. No matter what powers this stranger had, nobody could survive having their name written in the notebook. Light decided to use the police force as his eyes. He hacked into the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department server and issued a high-priority alert for a suspicious foreigner in the Shinjuku area possibly linked to a gas main explosion. He labeled the suspect as armed and dangerous. He wanted to see how the stranger reacted to pressure. If the man fought back, he would reveal his capabilities. If he ran, he would reveal his weakness. Strange found himself in a public library near the university district. He had used a simple glamour spell to make his robes look like a long trench coat and scarf to the eyes of the mundane observers. He sat at a wooden table with a stack of newspapers and history books. He read at superhuman speed, absorbing the history of this timeline. He learned about the rise of Kira. He learned that criminals were dying of heart attacks by the thousands. He learned that the world was slowly bending its knee to this invisible god. Strange realized that he was dealing with a reality warper or a powerful artifact user. The precision of the killings suggested rules. The victims were always identified by face and name. Strange touched the eye of Agamotto. The time stone was dormant, but the eye itself was a repository of mystic wisdom. He whispered a spell to the eye, asking it to reveal the nature of the entity known as Kira. The eye opened slightly, and a beam of pale light hit the newspaper article about the most recent deaths. The text on the paper seemed to bleed and rearrange itself. Strange saw a vision of a black book falling from the sky. He saw a silhouette of a Shinigami. He recognized the creature not from this earth, but from ancient texts in Kamar-Taj that described the death gods of the Japanese pantheon. They were dimensional parasites that extended their own lives by stealing the time of humans. If a human was wielding the power of a death god, it was a violation of the natural order so severe it threatened the stability of the multiverse. This was why Strange had been pulled here. The imbalance was a gravity well that had snagged him as he fell through the dimensions. Suddenly, the library doors burst open. A squad of riot police swarmed into the quiet room, shouting orders. They had descriptions of a foreigner with a high collar. Strange did not look up from his book immediately. He felt the vibration of their boots on the floor. He sighed. He did not want to hurt these men. They were just doing their job, and they were terrified of Kira too. The captain of the squad pointed a rifle at Strange and ordered him to put his hands on his head. Strange closed the book gently. He stood up and raised his hands. He needed to see how the law worked here. He allowed them to handcuff him. The metal cuffs felt cold and heavy. As they led him out of the library, he saw a young man standing in the crowd of students watching. The young man had a dark aura that made Strange's skin crawl. It was not Kira, but it was someone who had touched the darkness. Strange locked eyes with the student for a second. The student flinched. Strange was shoved into the back of a police van. Inside the van, Strange sat in darkness. He focused his mind on the handcuffs. In his own world, he could have phased through them in a microsecond. Here, he had to use a more mechanical application of magic. He visualized the molecular structure of the locking mechanism and applied a small burst of kinetic will. The lock clicked and opened. He kept his hands behind his back, pretending to still be bound. The van drove for 20 minutes before stopping at a holding facility. Strange was processed and put into an interrogation room. A detective named Matsuda entered the room looking nervous. He placed a folder on the table and asked Strange for his name. Strange knew that giving his name was dangerous. The news reports said Kira needed a name and a face. Strange remained silent. Matsuda pressed him, saying that they just wanted to know about the explosion. Strange looked at Matsuda and spoke for the first time. His voice was calm and resonated with the subtle harmonic power that made Matsuda sit up straighter. Strange said that he was a doctor. He said that the world was sick and he was looking for the disease. Matsuda looked confused. He asked for identification. Strange simply tapped the table with his index finger. A spark of golden energy jumped from his finger to the table, leaving a small scorch mark. Matsuda jumped back, his hand going to his gun. At that exact moment, the lights in the police station flickered. A high-pitched whine filled the air. Strange sensed it before it happened. The death energy was gathering again, not for him, but for someone nearby. A criminal in the holding cells down the hall. Strange stood up, kicking the chair back. He waved his hand and the door to the interrogation room slammed open, the lock shattering under a concentrated blast of force. Matsuda screamed. Strange ran into the hallway, his cloak billowing out from under the illusion of the trench coat, which was now failing. He reached the cell block just as a prisoner clutched his chest. Strange did not hesitate. He cast a spell of temporal suspension. It was a difficult spell that froze time within a localized bubble. He threw the sphere of orange energy around the dying man. The man froze mid-heart attack. The grey death energy that was trying to enter the man's body hit the barrier and sizzled like water on a hot pan. The connection was blocked. For the first time in the history of this world, a Kira execution had been interrupted. In his bedroom, Light Yagami stared at his watch. He had written the name of a petty thief who was currently in police custody, just to test the timing. The thief should have died 40 seconds ago. Light waited. He checked the police database. The status of the prisoner did not change to deceased. It remained active. Light's eyes widened. He checked the news. No report of death. He looked at Ryuk. Ryuk was no longer laughing. The Shinigami was leaning forward, staring at the wall as if looking through it. Ryuk said that something was wrong. He said he could not see the man's lifespan anymore. It was blurry. Light felt a cold knot of anger in his stomach. Someone had stopped the death note. It was impossible, but it had happened. This was not just a visitor. This was an enemy who could rewrite the laws of the game. Light closed the notebook. He needed to be smarter. He needed to find out who this stranger was, and he needed to do it without revealing his own location. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. He would have to use his father's position in the police force to get eyes inside the station. Back in the station, chaos had erupted. The police were shouting and pointing guns at Strange, who stood in front of the frozen cell. The sphere of magic glowed with a humming light illuminating the terrified face of the prisoner inside. Strange turned to the police. He raised a hand in a gesture of peace. He told them that he was not their enemy, but he could not let them die. He explained that the man inside the bubble was being targeted by a curse. The police did not understand. They opened fire. Strange sighed. He spun his hands, creating a mandala shield of hard light. The bullets impacted the shield and flattened, falling to the floor harmlessly. Strange pushed the shield forward, pushing the police back gently but firmly. He was not fighting them, he was containing them. He needed to study the blocked connection. He looked closely at the frozen death energy pressing against his barrier. It was not just magic, it was a transaction, a life for a name. He understood the mechanism now. It relied on a psychic link established through information. If the killer did not have the information, the link could not form. But if the killer had the name, the link was absolute unless interrupted by a greater force. Strange knew he could not hold this time freeze forever. The universe was pushing back. The barrier was cracking. He had to leave. He dropped the shield and summoned a portal. It was small and unstable, sparking with jagged edges, but it opened a gateway to the roof of the building. Strange stepped through, and the portal snapped shut behind him, leaving the police staring at an empty hallway and a prisoner who suddenly collapsed dead as the time freeze expired. Strange had bought a few minutes, but he had not saved the man. He had, however, proven that the system could be fought. Strange stood on the roof of the police station in the rain. He was breathing hard. The use of magic was exhausting him rapidly. He needed a source of power. He looked out at the Tokyo skyline. He sensed a different kind of energy in the city. It was not death energy. It was the energy of deep intellect and stubborn will. It was coming from a skyscraper in the distance. Strange focused. He could feel a mind there, a mind that was constantly calculating, constantly observing. It felt familiar. It felt like Tony Stark, but colder. Strange realized there was another player on the board, someone who was hunting Kira with logic instead of magic. Strange decided to make contact. He adjusted his cloak and levitated into the air, flying low over the rooftops toward the source of the intellectual signal. Meanwhile, in the hotel room, heavily fortified with servers and screens, the man known as L sat crouched on a sofa, eating a piece of cake. He was watching the security footage from the police station interrogation room. He rewound the video to the moment Strange blocked the bullets. He played it frame by frame. He zoomed in on the golden sparks. L did not believe in magic, but he believed in evidence. The evidence showed a man manipulating energy. The evidence showed a Kira killing being delayed. L put his thumb to his lip. This changed the profile. Kira was no longer the only anomaly. L pressed a button on his microphone. He spoke to his handler, Watari. He told Watari to prepare the car. L said he wanted to go to the site of the anomaly. He said that the probability of the stranger being an ally was 40%. The probability of him being a second Kira was 30%. The probability of him being something entirely different was 30%. L liked those odds. He wanted to see the magic man. Strange landed on the helipad of the hotel. He walked to the door and found it locked. He placed his hand on the mechanism and unlocked it with a thought. He walked down the stairs, his footsteps silent. He sensed the presence below him. He reached a floor that was entirely sealed off. He stood in front of a steel door. There was a camera pointing at him. Strange looked into the lens. He spoke clearly. He said that he knew someone was watching. He said that he knew they were hunting the same monster. The speaker above the door crackled. A voice heavily synthesized and distorted replied. The voice asked Strange to define the monster. Strange replied that the monster was a child playing with a weapon that belonged to a god. There was a long silence. Then the lock on the steel door disengaged with a heavy clunk. The door swung open. Strange walked into the dark room illuminated by screens. He saw the figure crouched on the sofa. Elle looked up at Strange with wide dark eyes. Strange looked at Elle. It was the meeting of the two most dangerous intellects in the city. One armed with the secrets of the multiverse, the other armed with the ultimate deductive reasoning. The players were on the board, and the game had escalated from a murder investigation to a cosmic war. The silence in the sealed hotel room was heavier than the steel door that had just closed behind Stephen Strange. Elle crouched on the sofa with his knees pulled up to his chest, staring unblinkingly at the Sorcerer Supreme. The monitors around them hummed with the sound of 1,000 cooling fans, a mechanical choir singing to the god of information. Strange did not fidget. He stood perfectly still, his cape settling around him like liquid blood. The air between them was charged with the friction of two incompatible cosmologies. Elle was the avatar of deductive reasoning, a man who believed that every effect had a cause that could be measured and understood. Strange was the avatar of the impossible, a man who bent reality to his will through belief and gesture. For a long minute, neither of them spoke. Elle took a strawberry from a plate on the coffee table and held it by the stem, examining it, as if it were a suspect. He finally broke the silence, his voice flat and synthesized through the computer speakers, before he decided to speak directly with his own voice, which was quiet and dry. He said that the probability of Strange being Kira was now calculated at 5%. He said that the probability of Strange being a delusion caused by sleep deprivation was still at 10%. He asked Strange to sit down. Strange declined the seat. He walked to the wall of monitors and looked at the flow of data. He saw crime scene photos, autopsy reports, and timelines. He saw the desperate attempt of a human mind to categorize the work of a god. Strange told Elle that his math was impressive, but his equation was missing a variable. He said that Elle was trying to solve a murder, but he should be fighting an exorcism. Elle took a bite of the strawberry and chewed slowly. He asked Strange to define the variable. Strange turned and raised his hand. He did not cast a fireball or open a portal. Instead, he did something small and precise. He reached out with his mind and touched the electromagnetic field of the central monitor. He did not hack it with code. He infused the silicon and glass with a revelation spell. The screen flickered, and the blue light turned into a swirling vortex of purple mist. The image on the screen changed. It was no longer a spreadsheet of heart attack victims. It was a live feed of the city outside, but seen through the lens of the mystic arts. The sky was filled with the grey chains. The buildings were covered in spiritual rot, and hovering over the Tokyo Tower in the distance was a faint, jagged outline of a laughing giant. Elle dropped the strawberry. He leaned forward, his eyes widening. He asked what he was looking at. Strange explained that this was the astral layer of Tokyo. He explained that the creature on the screen was a Shinigami, a death god. He explained that the killer Elle called Kira was not acting alone. He was tethered to this parasite. Elle stared at the screen for a long time. His mind was racing, rewriting his entire understanding of the case. He did not panic. He adapted. He accepted the new data point. He looked at Strange and asked if the parasite could be killed. Strange replied that it could, but the cost would be high. He said that to kill a death god, one must usually enter the realm of death. Miles away, Light Yagami was walking home from the university. He felt a sudden sharp pain in his head. It was not a physical pain. It was a warning. Ryuk, who was floating above him, suddenly stopped laughing. The Shinigami looked toward the city center, his yellow eyes narrowing. Ryuk told Light that the air tasted different. He said it tasted like old magic. Light stopped walking. He looked at Ryuk and asked what that meant. Ryuk scratched his neck and said that another player had entered the game. He said that someone was looking at the city with eyes that could see the Shinigami. Light felt a cold sweat break out on his back. He realized that his plan to use the police was not enough. If this enemy could see Ryuk, then the enemy could find Light. Light needed to escalate. He needed to test the limits of this new threat. He resumed walking, but his pace was faster. He needed to get to his room. He needed the notebook. Light decided that he could not simply kill the stranger because he did not have a name, but he could use the notebook to force the stranger to reveal himself. Light formulated a plan that was cruel and efficient. He would create a scenario that no human could solve. If the stranger was a savior, he would try to save the victims, and in doing so, he would show Light exactly what he could and could not do. The next morning, the city of Tokyo woke up to a nightmare. It began at the chaotic intersection of Shibuya Crossing. It was rush hour. Thousands of people were surging across the street. Suddenly, 50 people in the crowd stopped moving. They did not die immediately. They reached into their bags and pockets. They pulled out whatever they had, pens, keys, umbrellas, and then with blank expressions, they began to attack the people around them. It was a riot of madness. The notebook allowed for control of the victim's actions before death. Light had written a specific set of instructions. He had written the names of 50 criminals who were currently out on bail or awaiting trial. He commanded them to cause maximum chaos at Shibuya Crossing for 5 minutes before dying of heart attacks. The screaming started instantly. The crowd panicked. It was a stampede. People were being trampled. The 50 controlled attackers were relentless, striking out with a strength that seemed hysterical and desperate. In the hotel room, the alarm screamed. L watched the footage from the traffic cameras. He saw the madness. He saw the pattern. He told Strange that this was Kira. He said that Kira was flushing them out. Strange looked at the screen. He saw the spiritual strings puppeting the attackers. He saw the dark energy forcing their limbs to move. He knew he had to act. He could not let innocent people die in a stampede. Strange told L to stay in the bunker. He spun his hand and a sparking portal opened in the middle of the room, showing the rainy chaos of Shibuya. Strange stepped through. He emerged in the center of the intersection, hovering 10 feet above the ground. The wind whipped his cloak. The sound of screaming was deafening. Strange did not hesitate. He summoned the images of Icon. Dozens of illusory duplicates of himself appeared in the crowd, distracting the attackers. Then he used the bands of Sitarak not as a whip, but as a net. Red bands of energy exploded from his hands, weaving through the crowd, binding the 50 maddened attackers instantly. He pinned them to the ground harmlessly. The crowd stopped running. They looked up at the wizard floating in the sky. Silence fell over the intersection. Strange descended slowly. He looked at the attackers struggling in the red bands. He could feel the death magic ticking inside them like a bomb. He knew they were scheduled to die. He placed his hands on the nearest attacker, a young man with a shaved head. Strange chanted a counterspell, trying to severance the link between the man and the notebook. He poured golden light into the man's chest. He visualized the ink fading. He fought the will of the death note with the will of the sorcerer supreme. For a moment it seemed to work. The grey pallor left the man's face. But then the universe pushed back. The laws of this reality were absolute. The name had been written. The ink was dry. The energy of the Death Note did not just attack the body, it attacked the timeline of the soul. Strange felt a backlash of cold void energy shoot up his arms. He gasped and recoiled. The man under his hands convulsed. And then simultaneously, all 50 men bound in the red bands went rigid. Their hearts stopped. They died instantly. Strange stood in the middle of 50 corpses, his magic useless against the finality of the curse. The crowd screamed again. They did not see a savior. They saw a man in strange clothes standing over dead bodies. Sirens wailed in the distance. Strange looked up at the giant screens on the buildings. They were broadcasting him live. He realized with a sinking heart that he had played right into Light's hands. He had revealed himself to the world, and he had failed to save anyone. Up in his room, Light Yagami watched the news feed and smiled. He took a potato chip and ate it. He noted that the stranger had physical binding powers and flight. He also noted that the stranger could not stop the heart attacks. This was crucial data. Magic had limits. Death was absolute. Light picked up his pen again. He was not done. He wanted to break the stranger's spirit. He wanted to turn the city against him. Light began to write again. This time, he did not target criminals. He targeted the first responders who were rushing to the scene. He wrote the names of the police officers driving the lead cars. He wrote that they would swerve into the crowd. Strange was still standing in the intersection trying to understand why his counterspell had failed. When the first police car plowed through the intersection at 60 miles per hour, it smashed into a group of bystanders. Strange shouted and threw up a shield of the seraphim, a wall of geometric light that caught the second car just before it hit a bus. The impact shook the ground. Strange was holding back tons of metal with his mind. He was overwhelmed. The death energy was everywhere. It was a storm of probability manipulation and direct biological termination. Strange realized he could not fight this defensively. He needed to reset the board. He made a dangerous decision. He reached for the Eye of Agamotto. He knew that manipulating time in a foreign universe was risky. The time stone drew power from the flow of its native reality. Here, the time stream was different. It was rigid, linear, but Strange had no choice. He opened the eye. The green glow illuminated the rain. He focused on the last 5 minutes. He grabbed the fabric of time and twisted it counterclockwise. He shouted the incantation, straining every vein in his neck. The world began to jitter. The rain stopped and floated upward. The police cars flew backwards away from the crowd. The dead men on the ground began to uncurl and stand up. The breath returned to their lungs. Strange was forcing the universe to vomit up the event. He was undoing the deaths. Light Yagami watched his TV screen glitch. He saw the replay happening in reverse. He stood up, his chair falling over. He screamed. It was impossible. The stranger was undoing the work of the god of the new world. Ryuk was not laughing anymore. Ryuk was hissing. The Shinigami sensed the violation. Time was being stolen from the death god. If the victims came back to life, the Shinigami would lose the lifespan they had just gained. This was a theft of divine currency. Strange held the spell. The sweat poured down his face. He had reversed time by 2 minutes. The 50 men were alive. The police cars were safe. The crowd was calm. Strange prepared to close the loop to seal the new timeline. But he had underestimated the metaphysical weight of the Death Note. The notebook was not just a weapon. It was a law. A name written in the book must die. It was a fixed point in destiny. As Strange tried to lock the timeline, the universe shrieked. A bolt of black lightning erupted from the void, colliding with the green light of the time stone. The two absolute forces clashed directly over Shibuya. The paradox tore the sky open. The result was catastrophic. The 50 men who Strange had resurrected did not stay alive. They did not just die again. They shattered. Their bodies turned into grey dust and blew away in the wind. The police cars that had been reversed did not park safely. They fused with the asphalt, the metal twisting into grotesque shapes. And the people in the crowd who had been saved from the car crash fell to their knees, clutching their heads. Their memories were fractured. They remembered dying and living at the same time. Thousands of people in the intersection went into immediate seizure. The psychological shockwave leveled the district. Strange was thrown backwards, smashing through a billboard. He fell to the street, his cloak torn. The eye of Agamotto slammed shut, the green light fading to a dull flicker. Strange lay on the wet pavement, gasping for air. He felt a crack in his own soul. He had tried to overwrite the law of this world, and the world had broken his fingers. He looked around. It was worse than before. The 50 men were gone, erased from existence entirely, not even bodies left to bury. The civilians were traumatized, their minds broken by the temporal recoil. And in the center of the intersection, a tear in reality, remained a jagged black wound that whispered with the voices of the damned. Strange realized he had made a terrible mistake. He had treated this world like a comic book reality where death was a revolving door. But here, death was a wall, and he had just crashed the car of reality into it. Elle watched the screen go black as the cameras in Shibuya shorted out. He sat in the dark. His hands were shaking slightly. He had just witnessed a miracle and a tragedy. He realized that Strange was powerful, but he was also dangerous. He was a bull in a china shop, and the china shop was Tokyo. Elle realized that he could not just use Strange as a weapon. He had to contain him. He had to guide him, or he had to stop him. Elle pressed the button to call Watari. He ordered the evacuation of the safe house. He knew that the location was no longer secure. If Strange could break time, then the rules of hiding were irrelevant. Strange struggled to his feet. The police were surrounding him now, not with handcuffs, but with terror. They didn't know whether to shoot him or pray to him. Strange looked at them with sad, ancient eyes. He raised his hands not to fight, but to surrender. He needed to get back to Elle. He needed to regroup. But as he prepared to cast a portal, he felt a presence behind him. He turned. Standing in the rain unnoticed by the police was a figure. It was not Ryuk. It was a woman. She had blonde hair, and she was wearing gothic Lolita clothing. Misa Amane. She was looking at him with eyes that glowed red. The Shinigami eyes. She saw his name. She saw his lifespan. But she also saw something else. She saw that his lifespan was flickering. It was not a number. It was an equation that was constantly rewriting itself. Misa tilted her head. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. She whispered into the phone. She told Light that she had the name. She said the name was Stephen Vincent Strange. Light received the call. He sat back in his chair. He had the name. He picked up his pen. He hovered the tip over the page. He could end it right now. He could write Stephen Vincent Strange. Heart attack. But Light paused. He looked at the chaos on the news. He looked at the black tear in the sky over Shibuya. He realized that simply killing Strange was a waste. Strange had power that Light did not understand. Power that could rewrite time. If Light could take that power, if he could control it, then he would truly be a god. He would not just be the god of death, he would be the god of reality. Light put the pen down. He decided not to kill Strange yet. He would break him first. He would make the Sorcerer Supreme beg for death, and then he would take the eye that hung around his neck. Strange vanished from the intersection, stepping through a portal just as the bullets began to fly. He collapsed onto the floor of the hotel room. L was already packing up his equipment. L looked down at the bleeding sorcerer. He did not offer sympathy. He offered a towel. He told Strange that the experiment had failed. He told Strange that they had lost public support. The world now saw Strange as a terrorist. Strange wiped the blood from his mouth. He looked at L and said that it was worse than that. He said that he had felt the gaze of the predator. He said that Kira had eyes that could see through magic. He said that his anonymity was gone. L nodded. He said that in that case, they had to move to phase 2. L opened a briefcase. Inside was not a computer, but a piece of paper. A physical letter. L said that he had prepared this in case the technological advantage was lost. He said they were going off the grid. He said they were going to hunt the Shinigami directly. But outside the hotel, the sky was darkening. The tear in Shibuya was growing. The paradox Strange had created was leaking. Shadows were detaching themselves from buildings and crawling through the streets. The balance of the universe had been tipped. The barrier between the human world and the Shinigami realm was thinning. Strange's attempt to save 50 lives had weakened the walls of reality itself. And from the tear a sound emerged. It was not the laughter of Ryuk. It was the roar of something much older and much hungrier. The king of death was watching, and he was not pleased that a human sorcerer had tried to steal his property. The sound of the hotel windows cracking under the pressure of the spiritual weight outside. The safe house was no longer safe. The war had begun. The glass facade of the hotel did not shatter outward from an explosion, but imploded inward, as if the building itself was taking a sharp, sudden breath. Stephen Strange and L sprinted down the service stairwell, the metal vibrating under their feet with a low-frequency hum that rattled their teeth. The air in the stairwell was colder than the Tokyo winter outside. It was the chill of the grave. Strange could feel the dimensional pressure dropping rapidly. The paradox he had created in Shibuya was not staying contained. It was sending shockwaves through the ley lines of the city, and those shockwaves were hunting them. L moved with a surprising agility for a man who sat in a chair all day, his posture hunched, but his strides long and efficient. He carried the briefcase containing the physical data hard drives, the only record of the investigation that was safe from the digital manipulation of Kira. Strange followed his red cape hanging limp and heavy like a wet towel. He was drained. The time manipulation spell had cost him more than just energy. It had cost him connection. He tried to summon a simple levitation spell to speed their descent, but the magic sputtered in his hands like a dying ember. The local reality was hardening, calcifying around the absolute laws of the Death Note. They burst out of the service exit into the back alley. The rain was falling horizontally, driven by a wind that smelled of sulfur and ozone. L pointed to a nondescript grey sedan parked near a dumpster. It was an older model, with no onboard computer, no GPS, and manual locks. L threw the briefcase into the back seat and slid into the driver's side. Strange hesitated for a fraction of a second, his instinct reaching for a sling ring that he knew would not work. He got into the passenger seat, just as the heavy steel door of the hotel blew off its hinges behind them. It did not hit the ground. It dissolved into grey dust in midair, eaten by the entropy storm chasing them. L turned the key and the engine roared to life, a mechanical sound that felt reassuringly grounded in physics. He slammed the car into gear and peeled out of the alley onto the main road. The city of Tokyo was unrecognizable. The neon lights were flickering in a strobe effect that induced nausea. Shadows stretched across the street at impossible angles disconnected from the objects that cast them. Strange looked out the window and saw the spiritual architecture of the city buckling. The tear in Shibuya was visible even from miles away, a towering pillar of black smoke that rose into the clouds, swirling with faces that screamed without sound. Strange realized that he hadn't just broken time, he had damaged the membrane between the human world and the Shinigami realm. The creatures of death were pressing against the glass of reality, and the glass was cracking. L drove with a blank expression, his eyes darting between the mirrors. He did not ask what was happening. He observed it. He categorized it. He accelerated. Strange spoke first, his voice raspy. He told L that they could not just run. He explained that the tear was a gravity well for supernatural energy. It would keep expanding until it consumed the archipelago. L replied without looking away from the road. He said that they could not fix the sky while they were being hunted by a god on the ground. He said that Kira knew who Strange was now. He said that the priority was survival and regrouping. Strange argued that survival was irrelevant if the world ended. He reached for the eye of Agamotto again, his fingers trembling. L reached over and slapped Strange's hand away. It was a sharp, shocking physical contact. L told him to stop. He said that using the stone again would widen the tear. He said that Strange was thinking like a wizard, but he needed to think like a chess player. In chess, you do not sacrifice the king to save a pawn. Suddenly the traffic lights at the intersection ahead turned red. All of them, in every direction. Cars slammed into each other, creating a wall of metal and glass. L did not brake. He spun the wheel, mounting the sidewalk, the sedan bouncing violently as it scraped against the storefronts. Pedestrians scattered screaming. Strange gripped the dashboard. He realized this was not a malfunction. This was Kira. Light Yagami was watching them or predicting their route. He was using the environment as a weapon. A billboard above them groaned its support struts, snapping with the sound of gunshots. It fell toward the car. Strange reacted on instinct. He did not try to stop the billboard. He did not try to rewind time. He thrust his hand forward and cast a transmuting spell. It was a small, localized burst of reality warping. The steel of the billboard turned into water. Tons of liquid crashed onto the roof of the car, washing over the windshield, but doing no damage. L turned on the wipers. He remarked that turning metal to water was a useful trick. He asked if Strange could turn the car into a plane. Strange replied that he could not. The transmutation had nearly caused him to pass out. The cost of magic here was 10 times higher than in his own dimension. They drove for an hour, navigating the back streets, avoiding the surveillance cameras that L knew were compromised. They abandoned the car in an industrial district near the docks and walked the rest of the way, entering a rusted drainage pipe that led deep underground. L led them through a maze of tunnels until they reached a heavy blast door. He opened it with a physical key. Inside was a bunker that smelled of stale air and coffee. It was filled with books, paper files, and analog equipment. There were no internet connections, no wireless signals. It was a dead zone. L walked to a desk and sat down, immediately opening the briefcase. Strange collapsed onto a cot in the corner. He stared at the concrete ceiling. He felt the absence of the Vishanti. He felt the cold gaze of this Shinigami king. For 2 days, they stayed in the bunker. It was a period of intense, agonizing study. Strange meditated, trying to recover his strength and stabilize his astral form. L read. He read every book on mythology, occultism, and folklore he could find, cross-referencing them with the data Strange provided about the multiverse. They argued constantly. Strange argued for a direct mystical strike on the source of the evil. He wanted to find Light and sever his connection to the notebook. L argued that they had no proof of Light's identity that would stand up to the logic of this world. He said that if they killed Light without exposing him, Kira would become a martyr and the killings would continue by a successor. L wanted to solve the case. Strange wanted to win the war. The breakthrough came when Strange explained the concept of equivalent exchange in magic. He explained that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred. He said that the death note must follow a similar law. The life stolen from the victims had to go somewhere. L stopped typing on his typewriter. He looked at Strange. He asked if the Shinigami ate the life. Strange confirmed it. L deduced that if the Shinigami were parasites, then the notebook was the feeding tube. And if one could block the tube, the parasite would starve, or it would attack the host. L formulated a plan. He did not want to destroy the notebook. He wanted to infect it. He wanted Strange to create a magical virus, a metaphysical construct that would attach itself to the next name written in the book and trace the signal back to the writer not physically, but spiritually. Meanwhile, in the comfort of his bedroom, Light Yagami was evolving. He sat at his desk, but he was not writing names. He was staring at a map of Tokyo. Ryuk floated behind him eating a basket of apples. Misa Amane sat on the bed swinging her legs. She looked at Light with adoration. She told him that she could still see the sorcerer's face in her mind. She asked if she should write it down. Light shook his head. He told her that killing Strange was the endgame, but breaking him was the strategy. Light had realized something during the Shibuya incident. Strange cared about people. He cared about collateral damage. He was a doctor, and that was a leverage point that was bigger than any magical shield. Light decided to conduct a test. He wanted to see how much pain Strange could absorb before he broke. Light turned to his computer. He began to type a message, not to the police, not to the news, but to the hospitals of Tokyo. The message was broadcast simultaneously to the administrative servers of the 5 largest hospitals in the city. It was a simple text file signed by Kira. It stated that at noon today a judgment would fall upon the medical establishment for harboring the foreign devil. It said that for every hour the Sorcerer Supreme remained free, 100 patients would die of heart attacks. It was a hostage situation with thousands of victims. The ultimatum was absolute: surrender or watch the sick die. News of the threat spread instantly. Panic erupted in the hospitals. Doctors and nurses, paralyzed by fear, looked at their patients wondering who would be the first to drop. In the bunker, L heard the report on a shortwave radio. He looked at Strange. Strange was already standing, his cloak hovering around his shoulders. His face was a mask of fury. He told L that this was his fault. He had brought this war to the innocent. L told him that was exactly what Kira wanted him to think. L said that if Strange surrendered, he would be killed, and then the patients would likely die anyway, because Kira tied up loose ends. Strange ignored him. He said he could not sit in a hole while people died in his name. He said he was going to the largest hospital. He was going to save them. L asked how. Strange said he would take them out of the equation. Strange left the bunker. He did not walk. He gathered the last reserves of his strength and tore a portal open. It was ragged and unstable, bleeding black smoke at the edges, but it connected. He stepped through and emerged in the lobby of the Tokyo Central Hospital. The scene was chaotic. People were screaming, running for the exits. Strange levitated into the center of the atrium. He amplified his voice with magic. He commanded them to be still. The authority in his voice was absolute. The crowd froze. Strange told them that he was going to protect them. He raised his hands and began the incantation for the mirror dimension. In the Marvel Universe, the mirror dimension is a parallel reality used to contain threats and practice magic without affecting the real world. Strange intended to shift the entire hospital, building patients and staff, into the mirror dimension. There they would be safe from the influence of the Death Note, because they would technically no longer be on the plane of existence where the Shinigami resided. It was a massive spell, a feat of geometric manipulation that required perfect focus. The walls of the hospital began to crystalline. The light refracted. The building started to fold in on itself, shifting out of phase with Tokyo. In his room, Light watched the news helicopter footage. He saw the hospital shimmering like a mirage. Ryuk laughed. Ryuk said that the magician was clever. Ryuk said that he could not see the people inside the hospital anymore. They were gone from his vision. The connection was severed. Light frowned. This was a problem. If Strange could hide people in another dimension, then the threat of the Death Note was nullified. Strange had found a shield that worked. Light needed to break that shield. He asked Ryuk a question. He asked if the Shinigami could enter that dimension. Ryuk said he could. Shinigami could go anywhere death existed. Light smiled. He told Ryuk to go to the hospital. He gave Ryuk a page from the Death Note. He told Ryuk to drop the page inside the mirror dimension. Strange stood in the lobby of the mirror hospital. The silence was absolute. The panic had stopped. The patients were safe. The staff looked out the windows and saw a twisted kaleidoscope sky, but they were alive. Strange allowed himself a moment of relief. He had done it. He had outsmarted the death god. He walked through the halls checking on the critical patients, but as he walked he felt a cold draft. He turned. Floating in the hallway intersecting with the crystalline geometry of the walls was Ryuk. The Shinigami looked grotesque in the refracted light, his limbs elongated and twisted. Ryuk was not supposed to be here. This was a dimension of pure magic, but Ryuk was a creature of the void. He did not follow the rules of the Vishanti. Ryuk waved at Strange. He held up a single sheet of black paper. He let it go. The paper fluttered down to the polished floor of the mirror hospital. Strange lunged for it. He tried to catch it with a whip of energy, but the paper hit the floor. And the moment it touched the ground of the mirror dimension, the reality reacted violently. The Death Note was a piece of the underlying code of the universe. The mirror dimension was a reflection. When the absolute truth touched the reflection, the mirror shattered. A spiderweb of cracks appeared in the air. The geometric stability of the dimension collapsed. The hospital did not just pop back into the real world. It was ejected with force. The building shook violently. Glass exploded. The transition caused a massive pressure wave. In the ICU, monitors sparked and failed. Strange was thrown against a wall, his head cracking against the plaster. He slid to the floor, vision swimming. The spell had failed. They were back in Tokyo, and the clock had struck noon. The first heart attack happened 3 seconds later. A nurse standing next to Strange grabbed her chest and fell. Then a patient in the bed. Then a security guard. The sound of bodies hitting the floor was rhythmic. Thud, thud, thud. Light was making good on his promise. He was killing them one by one. Strange scrambled to his feet, blood running down his forehead. He screamed a spell of halting, trying to freeze time again, but he didn't have the strength. He had spent it all on the mirror dimension. He was powerless. He watched a child in a wheelchair go rigid and slump over. Strange fell to his knees. He grabbed the child, trying to restart the heart with a jolt of lightning, but the soul was already gone, snatched by the grey claw. Strange roared in frustration and grief. He realized that he could not save them. Not like this. He had to stop the source. He had to find light. He stood up, swaying. He needed to track the connection. He opened the eye of Agamotto, fully risking the stability of the timeline. He did not look at the past. He looked at the energy signatures of the dying. He saw the threads. Thousands of black threads shooting up from the hospital, leading back to a single point in the suburbs. He had a lock. He had a direction. But he was not the only one moving. Outside the hospital, the police had arrived. Hundreds of them. And among them were the followers of Kira. A cult had formed in the last few days. People who worshipped the new god. They surrounded the hospital chanting. They saw Strange stumble out of the main doors. He looked like a demon. His robe torn, his face covered in blood, his eyes glowing with green fire. The crowd screamed in hate. They threw stones. They threw bottles. They blamed him for the deaths inside. They believed Kira's lie. Strange raised a shield to deflect the debris. He looked at the mob. He saw the fear and the fanaticism. He realized that this world was not just being killed, it was being corrupted. He levitated above the crowd, ignoring their screams. He flew toward the suburbs, following the black threads. He was going to end it. He was going to burn the notebook and the boy who held it. As he flew, he felt a presence beside him. He looked over. It was not a physical being. It was an astral projection. It was the Ancient One, or a memory of her. She floated beside him, her yellow robes calm in the wind. She spoke to him in his mind. She told him that he was losing his way. She said that he was fighting anger with anger. She said that a surgeon cuts to cure, not to kill. Strange argued with the ghost. He said there was no cure for this. He said the patient was terminal. The Ancient One faded, looking at him with sadness. She whispered that if he broke the rules of life to stop death, he would become what he fought. Strange landed in the quiet street of the suburb. The house was there, a normal 2-story house. The nameplate said, Yagami. Strange walked to the door. He did not knock. He blew the door off its hinges with a blast of wind. He stepped into the hallway. The house was quiet. He sensed the dark energy upstairs. He walked up the stairs, his footsteps heavy. He reached the door of the bedroom. He sensed the boy inside. He sensed the book. Strange raised his hand, preparing a spell of incineration. He kicked the door open. The room was empty. No light, no ryuk. Just a computer screen glowing in the dark. On the screen was a live video feed. It was a feed of the bunker. The secret bunker where L was hiding. Strange froze. He looked closer at the screen. The bunker was compromised. The blast door was open. And standing over L, who was sitting calmly in his chair, was Misa Amane. She was holding a notebook. She was smiling. And behind her, in the shadows of the bunker, stood Rem, another Shinigami. A voice came from the computer speakers. It was Light's voice. He told Strange that he had anticipated the tracking. He knew that if he killed enough people, Strange would trace the energy. So he had acted as a lure. He had led Strange away from the one person who could actually expose him. Light said that Misa had the eyes. She could see L's true name. She was writing it down right now. Strange stared at the screen. He was miles away. He could not portal. He could not fly back in time. He was checkmated. Light gave him a choice. He said Strange could surrender. He could vow to leave this universe and never return. If he did, L would live. If he refused, L would die. And then the killing would continue. Strange looked at L on the screen. L looked at the camera. He knew Strange was watching. L spoke. He did not beg. He did not ask for help. He simply said one word. Win. Then L reached into his pocket. He pulled out a switch. A dead man's switch. He pressed it. The bunker on the screen exploded. It wasn't a small explosion. It was a fuel-air detonation that incinerated everything inside. The camera feed went white and then static. L had destroyed the evidence. He had destroyed the data. And he had destroyed himself to prevent his name from being written, to prevent Kira from controlling his death. He had taken the pieces off the board. Strange stood in the empty bedroom of Light Yagami. The silence was deafening. L was dead. The hospital was a morgue. The city was a war zone. And the tear in the sky was now weeping black rain that sizzled when it hit the ground. Strange felt something break inside him. It wasn't his bone. It was his restraint. The Sorcerer Supreme had tried to play by the rules. He had tried to be a doctor. He had tried to be a hero. Now he was just a survivor. He looked at the empty desk. He saw a single apple sitting there. A taunt. Strange picked up the apple. He watched it rot in his hand, turning to dust in seconds. He dropped the dust. He did not scream. He did not cry. His face went cold. His eyes lost their human warmth and became the eyes of a statue. He turned and walked out of the room. He was done saving people. Now he was going to fix the reality. And if he had to break the timeline to do it, he would. Outside the house, the sky finally gave way. The barrier between worlds shattered completely. The color drained from the world, leaving everything in shades of grey and black. The Shinigami realm had not just leaked. It had merged. Giant skeletal figures began to rise from the ground all over Tokyo. They were not attacking. They were watching, waiting for the final duel. The King of Death had arrived to collect his due, and Stephen Strange was the only thing standing in his way. The explosion that consumed L and the bunker did not echo because in a world that had merged with the realm of death, sound was no longer a vibration of air, but a vibration of the soul, and the souls of Tokyo were too heavy to vibrate. Stephen Strange stood in the silence of Light Yagami's empty bedroom and watched the grey ash fall past the window like snow. The transition was complete. The vivid neon colors of Tokyo had been drained away, leaving a monochromatic nightmare where the buildings looked like tombstones and the streets looked like open graves. The sky was a churning ceiling of charcoal clouds, and through the gaps in the overcast gigantic rib cages and skulls of the Shinigami landscape were visible hanging upside down over the human world. Gravity felt nauseatingly fluid, as if the planet was trying to decide which way was down. Strange looked at his hands. They were turning grey. The necrotic energy of this dimension was not just an atmosphere. It was a radiation that was rewriting his biology. He could feel his connection to the Vishanti fading into a static hiss. The white magic of order had no place in a universe of absolute entropy. He was a battery running on empty in a room full of darkness. He had a choice to make. It was a small choice in the grand scheme of cosmic events, but it was the kind of choice that tipped the scales of existence. He could try to flee. He could use the last sparks of his sling ring to punch a hole back to the Marvel Universe, to abandon this doomed timeline to the boy god and his notebook. It would be the rational decision. It would save the Sorcerer Supreme to fight another day. But Strange looked at the dust of the rotted apple on the desk. He thought of the thousands of dead in the hospitals. He thought of L, who had burned himself alive to keep a secret. Strange closed his eyes and made the choice. He would not flee, but he would not fight as a Jedi of the mystic arts anymore. If the white magic was gone, he would use what was available. He opened his mouth and inhaled. He did not inhale air. He inhaled the death. He drew the grey necrotic mist into his lungs. It tasted like old copper and despair. It burned his throat and froze his blood. His veins turned black, visible through his pale skin. His eyes ceased to glow with the golden light of the Vishanti and ignited with a sickly violet flame, the colour of a bruise. He was absorbing the ambient energy of the Shinigami realm. He was turning himself into a vessel of the very force he was trying to stop. It was a violation of every oath he had taken at Kamar Taj. It was the path of the dark sorcerers he had spent his life destroying. But in a world without life, only death could fight death. Strange opened his eyes, and they were terrible to behold. He raised his hand, and the shadows in the room leaped to his command. Not out of obedience, but out of fear. He did not float out of the room. He dissolved into a swarm of black moths and flew out the window into the grey storm. In the center of Tokyo, Light Yagami stood on the observation deck of the Tokyo Skytree. He had commandeered the broadcasting tower. He was surrounded by the terrified remnants of the task force and his loyal cultists. They looked at the grey world with awe, believing it to be the dawn of the new world that Kira had promised. Light looked out at the ruin of the city and felt a surge of triumph that was dangerously close to madness. He believed he had won. The sorcerer was broken. El was dead. The police were his puppets. The world was terrified. He turned to Ryuk, who was hovering near the ceiling. Light asked Ryuk why the sky looked like bones. Ryuk did not answer with a joke. Ryuk was cowering. The Shinigami was pressing himself against the glass, trembling. Ryuk said that the king was here. Light laughed. He said that he was the king now. He said that even the Shinigami would bow to him. Light walked to the broadcasting console. He turned on the microphone. He intended to speak to the world to declare his victory. But as he opened his mouth, the speakers let out a high-pitched screech. The monitors on the wall exploded. The glass of the observation deck began to frost over with fractal patterns of black ice. A voice filled the room. It did not come from the speakers. It came from the corners of the room, from the shadows under the desks, from the backs of their own minds. It was Strange's voice, but it sounded like thousands of people speaking in unison. The voice said that there was no god in this room, only a butcher with a pen. Light spun around. He grabbed his pen. He grabbed the notebook. He screamed for the security guards to shoot. The guards raised their rifles, but they did not fire. They couldn't. Their shadows had risen up from the floor and wrapped around their ankles, binding them in place. From the elevator shaft, a cloud of black moths poured into the room, swirling together to form the figure of Stephen Strange. He looked like a corpse that had been pulled from a river. His robes were tattered and stained with the grey muck of the void. His skin was cracked, but the power radiating from him was suffocating. It was not magic. It was pressure. The sheer weight of his will, augmented by the death energy he had consumed, was crushing the room. Light Yagami was a genius, but he was a human genius. He understood psychology and logic. He did not understand cosmic horror. He stared at Strange, and his mind struggled to categorize the threat. This was not the man who had saved people at the intersection. This was a monster. Light reacted with the only weapon he had. He wrote. He scribbled Stephen Strange in the notebook furiously. He wrote heart attack. He wrote suicide. He wrote accident. He wrote it 10 times. Strange watched him write. He did not stop him. He walked forward slowly. The bullets from the few guards who managed to fire hit Strange's chest and passed through him as if he were made of smoke. Strange reached the desk where Light stood. Light looked at the notebook. Nothing was happening. Strange was not dying. Light looked up, his eyes wide with panic. He asked why. He screamed why. Strange leaned in close, his violet eyes boring into Light's soul. He whispered the answer. He said that to kill something, it must be alive. He said that Stephen Strange had died 10 minutes ago in a bedroom in the suburbs. He said that what stood before Light now was just a ghost driven by duty. The Death Note could not kill what was already part of the Death Realm. Light backed away, knocking over his chair. He looked at Ryuk. He commanded Ryuk to kill Strange. He shouted that he was the owner of the notebook and Ryuk had to protect him. Ryuk looked at Strange. Then Ryuk looked at the giant skeletal face of the Shinigami king visible through the frosted glass. Ryuk shook his head. He said that the human had broken the rules. He said that Strange was not human anymore. He said he would not fight a creature that had eaten the void. Ryuk floated backward, phasing through the wall, abandoning Light. Strange raised his hand. He did not strike Light. He struck the notebook. He fired a bolt of eldritch lightning not to destroy the book, but to unbind it. He targeted the metaphysical knot that tied the book to the human world. He wanted to sever the link. But Strange had miscalculated. In his state of corrupted power, he hit the book too hard. The Death Note was not just paper. It was a physical manifestation of a universal constant. When Strange's stolen death energy collided with the concentrated death law of the notebook, it did not break the book. It merged with it. The notebook screamed. It was a sound that shattered the windows of the sky tree. The black cover of the book melted and flowed like tar, covering Light's hands. Light screamed as the substance crawled up his arms. It was not burning him, it was fusing with him. Strange watched in horror as the small choice he had made to use death energy cascaded into a massive outcome. He had tried to fight fire with fire, and he had created an inferno. The energy of the notebook was seeking a new container, and since the book was being destroyed, it chose the writer. Light Yagami was lifted into the air. His body contorted. The black tar covered his skin, turning him into a silhouette of living darkness. His eyes glowed red. The notebook was no longer a tool he held. He was the notebook. He had become the avatar of the death curse. The power that had been limited by the rules of writing was now unleashed without restriction. Light did not need to write names anymore. He just had to think them. A wave of necrosis exploded from Light's body. It passed through the sky tree, turning the steel to rust and the concrete to dust in seconds. The tower began to collapse. Strange realized the catastrophe he had unleashed. He had turned a serial killer into a cosmic entity. He cast a shield, but the wave of death shattered it like glass. Strange was thrown out of the collapsing tower, falling into the grey void of the city. He caught himself mid-air, using the cloak of levitation, which was now a ragged grey shroud. He looked down. The sky tree was gone. In its place was a vortex of black energy swirling like a hurricane. In the center of the eye of the storm floated Light Yagami. But it wasn't Light anymore. It was Kira perfectly realized. He was a hole in the world. He looked at the city and the city began to die. Not people, the city itself. Buildings crumbled. Trees withered. The very ground turned to ash. Light was erasing the physical reality simply by existing. Strange realized that this was no longer a battle for Tokyo. This was a threat to the multiverse. If Light fully learned to control this power, he could erase timelines. He could look at a star and kill it. Strange needed to escalate. He needed to bring in a force that could counter this absolute death. He needed life, but not human life. He needed the raw primordial force of creation, and he knew where to find it, but it was locked away. Strange reached for the eye of Agamotto. The time stone was the only thing that had survived the transition to the grey world intact, because time existed even in death. Strange opened the eye. The green light struggled against the grey gloom. Strange did not cast a time loop. He did not rewind. He did the unthinkable. He inverted the stone. He turned the flow of time inside out. Instead of controlling the river of time, he broke the dam. He aimed the eye at the tear in the sky, at the Shinigami realm itself. He projected the concept of eternity into the realm of endings. It was a metaphysical paradox designed to poison the Shinigami king. He was feeding infinite time to a creature that existed to end time. The reaction was instantaneous and cataclysmic. The sky above Tokyo fractured. The giant skeletons convulsed. The grey clouds boiled and turned a sickening myriad of colors that should not exist. The paradox hit the Shinigami king. The entity roared a sound that flattened every building in Shinjuku. The king was choking on eternity. In his thrashing pain, the king lashed out. It struck the barrier between dimensions, not the barrier between Earth and the Shinigami realm, but the barrier between this universe and others. Strange watched as the sky peeled back like dead skin. Through the rents in the fabric of reality, he saw other worlds. He saw a world of superheroes flying through a New York skyline. He saw a world of pirates sailing on a grand line. He saw a world of ninjas running through trees. The walls were coming down. The infection of this timeline was spreading. Light Yagami noticed the breach. He looked up at the multiverse. He smiled with his featureless black face. He saw infinite names, infinite victims. He began to rise toward the tear. Strange flew to intercept him. He slammed into Light mid-air. They grappled. It was a wrestling match between a sorcerer corrupted by death and a human turned into death. They crashed through the ruins of the Shibuya station. Strange punched Light with fists wreathed in the green fire of the time stone. Light retaliated with blasts of pure cessation that rotted Strange's flesh on contact. They were tearing each other apart. Strange shouted at Light. He told him to look at what he had become. He told him he was not a god, he was a cancer. Light laughed, a distorted, multitonal sound. He said that cancer was just growth without limits. He said he would grow until he filled everything. He grabbed Strange by the throat. The black tar began to spread onto Strange, trying to consume him too. Strange felt his essence fading. He was losing. He had one play left. A gambit that relied on the one thing Light had always underestimated. The rules. Strange knew that even as a monster, Light was bound by the logic of the death note. The rule stated, "The human whose name is written in this note shall die." Strange realized that Light was now the note, so Strange had to write on him. Strange summoned a mystical dagger, not a weapon of energy, but a physical blade he had conjured from the matter of the destroyed tower. He didn't try to stab Light's heart. He tried to carve into Light's chest. He wanted to write a name on the living notebook. Light realized what Strange was doing. He panicked. He blasted Strange backward. Strange flew through a wall, landing in the rubble. He was broken. He couldn't move. Light hovered over him, preparing the final erasure. Light declared that he would start with Strange's universe. He would find this Earth 616, and he would write it out of existence. But as Light prepared the final blow, a shadow fell over him. It was not a Shinigami. It was something else. The breach in the sky had attracted attention. The paradox, Strange, created by feeding time to death, had sent a signal flare across the multiverse. And something had answered. From the tear in the reality, a figure descended. It was a woman. She was clad in a purple cloak, and on her face was a skull. It was Lady Death from the Marvel Universe. She had come to investigate why her garden was being poisoned by this foreign rot. She looked at the Shinigami king writhing in the sky. She looked at the abomination that was light Yagami. She did not speak. She simply pointed a skeletal finger. The arrival of a second concept of death caused the reality to scream. The laws of the Death Note universe clashed with the laws of the Marvel abstract entities. The air turned into glass and shattered. Light, Yagami, froze. He was caught between two competing definitions of his own existence. Was he a god, or was he a servant? Strange saw his chance. The arrival of Lady Death had distracted Light and momentarily stunned the Shinigami laws. Strange forced his broken body to move. He crawled toward the time stone which had fallen from his neck. He grabbed it. He didn't use it to fight. He used it to send a message. Not to anyone in this world, but to the only person smart enough to understand the equation of a collapsing multiverse. He sent a message back in time, back to the moment he entered the bunker, back to L. He knew he couldn't change the present. The present was gone. The world was dead. But he could plant a seed in the past. He encoded a single warning into a temporal packet and fired it into the quantum foam. Don't hide. Attack. The effort killed him. Or at least, it killed the body he was inhabiting. Stephen Strange collapsed into dust. His soul burned out by the strain of wielding the time stone while corrupted by death energy. Light Yagami looked down at the pile of dust. He laughed. He had won. He turned to face Lady Death. He prepared to fight the intruder. He thought he was supreme, but he did not notice the small spark of green light that had vanished into the past. He did not know that the game had just been reset, not by a reversal of time, but by a change in strategy. Strange was dead. Lady Death and the Shinigami King were beginning a war that would consume the solar system. And Light Yagami, the boy who wanted to bring justice, was now a void eating the universe. The screen of reality faded to black, not because the story was over, but because there was no light left to see by. The multiverse had been breached. The quarantine was broken. The nightmare was no longer contained. The green spark of the time stone, which had carried the desperate warning of a dying sorcerer supreme, did not travel through the air. It traveled through the marrow of reality itself, tunneling backward through the causal chain of the last 48 hours. It did not arrive as a whisper or a hologram. It arrived as a cerebral hemorrhage. Inside the sealed bunker, deep beneath the industrial district of the past timeline, L suddenly arched his back and screamed a sound that was entirely uncharacteristic of the stoic detective. He fell from his chair, convulsion racking his thin frame, as the memories of a future that had not yet happened were force-fed into his synapses. He saw the fire, he saw the void, he saw the black tower of Light Yagami and the skeletal face of Lady Death. He felt the heat of his own suicide. The data packet was compressed and violent, a lifetime of horror uploaded in a nanosecond. Watari rushed to his side, dropping the tray of tea, but L waved him away with a trembling hand. L gasped for air, his eyes wide and bloodshot, the pupils dilated to the point of blackness. He did not ask what had happened. He knew. The information was already integrated. He looked up at the Stephen Strange of this timeline, who was sitting on the cot meditating, trying to recover from the Shibuya incident. This Strange was still whole, still human, unaware that his future self had just died, in a timeline of ash. L spoke, and his voice was devoid of its usual detached curiosity. It was the voice of a man who had seen the bottom of the abyss. He told Strange to stop meditating. He said that the plan had changed. He said that hiding was death. He said that attrition was death. He said that in 3 days Strange would turn into a monster and Light Yagami would eat the solar system. Strange opened his eyes, looking at the detective with concern. He sensed the temporal residue clinging to L like static electricity. Strange asked what he had seen. L stood up, wiping a trickle of blood from his nose. He did not explain the vision. He simply stated the conclusion. He said they had to kill the timeline. He said they had to go to the task force headquarters immediately, and they had to force a checkmate before the board expanded. Strange argued that they were not ready, that they needed to isolate the notebook. L grabbed Strange's wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. He looked Strange in the eye and said that there was no notebook anymore. There was only a cancer. And you do not debate with cancer, you cut it out. L said he knew who Kira was. He said he knew where he was, and he was done playing the game by the rules of the law. Strange saw the conviction in L's eyes. He saw the reflection of a cosmic horror that he himself had not yet witnessed, but recognized the scent of. He nodded. He stood up and adjusted his cloak. He asked L where they were going. L said they were going to the lion's den. They were going to the police headquarters to confront Light Yagami in front of his father and the task force. It was a suicide mission, strategically speaking, but L knew that the alternative was an apocalypse. Strange placed a hand on L's shoulder. He cast a spell of fortification, not a shield, but a mental clarity charm to keep L's mind from shattering under the weight of the future memories. Then he spun his hand. The portal opened. It did not lead to a safe house. It led directly into the center of the main operations room of the Japanese task force. Light Yagami was sitting at his computer, acting the part of the diligent student, helping the police hunt for the foreigner. He was feeling confident. He had just sent the threat to the hospitals. He was waiting for the news of the surrender. Suddenly, the air in the room tore open. The orange sparks of the portal were brighter and more violent than before, fueled by Strange's urgency. The police officers shouted and drew their guns. Light stood up, his heart hammering. He expected an attack from the outside, not an invasion. Stephen Strange stepped out, his cape billowing, and beside him walked L. Not the shadowy figure on a screen, but the physical human being. The task force froze. They had never seen L in person. They saw a disheveled young man with dark circles under his eyes standing next to the wizard. Chief Yagami Light's father lowered his gun in confusion. He asked what was happening. He asked who this was. L did not look at the chief. He looked only at Light. The stare was heavy, burdened with the knowledge of the dead future. Light felt a chill run down his spine. He had played mental chess with L for weeks, but this was different. This L was not looking for clues. He was looking at a corpse. L spoke clearly to the room. He said that he was L, and he pointed a finger at Light. He did not say, "I suspect you." He said, "You are the end of the world." Light panicked internally, but his face remained a mask of innocent shock. He asked Ryuzaki, using L's alias, what he was talking about. He asked if he was insane. He looked at his father, seeking protection. Chief Yagami stepped between L and his son. He shouted that this was madness. He said that Strange was the terrorist. L ignored the father. He kept walking toward Light. He said that he knew about the notebook. He knew about the Shinigami. He knew about the eyes. And he knew that if Light was not stopped in the next 10 minutes, everyone in this room would die, followed by everyone in the city. Light's mind raced. He realized that L had abandoned the need for legal proof. This was a direct confrontation. Light's hand drifted toward his pocket where he kept a scrap of the death note. He needed to write. He needed to kill L right now. Strange saw the movement. He did not use magic to bind Light. He knew from the future memory, which was bleeding from L's mind into his own through their proximity, that magic could trigger the escalation. Instead, Strange used the time stone. He did not stop time. He created a local temporal loop around Light's right hand. As Light reached for the paper, his hand moved but never arrived. It was Zeno's paradox made manifest. Light's fingers stretched toward the pocket, effectively moving but spatially getting no closer. Light stared at his hand in horror. He pushed harder, but the air felt like infinite molasses. Ryuk, who was floating in the corner, laughed. He found this entertaining. A human trapped in a fraction of a second. But Strange turned his gaze to the Shinigami. His eyes glowed with the emerald light of Agamotto. Strange spoke to the death god. He said that he knew the rules. He knew that Shinigami were not allowed to kill to extend a human's life. But he also knew that Ryuk was bored. Strange made a gamble. He told Ryuk that if he interfered, he would lock this room in a time loop forever. A moment of eternal boredom. Ryuk stopped laughing. The threat of eternity was the only thing that scared a creature of the void. Ryuk floated back sitting on top of a filing cabinet. He said he would watch. L closed the distance. He stood face to face with Light. The police were screaming orders, but Strange held them back with the crimson bands of Sidorak, which manifested as soft, non-lethal ribbons that gently pushed to the officers against the walls. They were spectators now. L looked at Light and told him that he had seen the future where Light won. He told him about the grey world. He told him about the emptiness. He asked Light if that was what he wanted, to be the king of a graveyard. Light sneered, the mask slipping. He whispered that L was lying. He said that he would create a utopia. He said he was a god. L slapped him. It was a weak physical blow, but the symbolism was shattering. L said he was just a serial killer with a magic gun. L reached into his pocket and pulled out the physical evidence he had been hoarding in the bunker. Not the notebook, but the analysis of the writing. He threw the papers in Light's face. He shouted at Light to confess. He wanted to break Light's ego before he broke his body. But Light Yagami was not so easily broken. The pressure of the situation, the paradox on his hand, and the accusation triggered a defense mechanism. Light did not break down. He doubled down. He screamed out to the universe. He screamed for help, not to the police, but to the notebook itself. He surrendered his will to the curse. Just as he had done in the bad future, Light invited the power in. But this time, he was not the owner of the notebook. He was the victim of it. The piece of paper in his pocket ignited with black flame. The temporal loop Strange had created shattered under the pressure of absolute death energy. The blast threw L backward. Strange shielded him, taking the brunt of the necrotic force. Light rose into the air. His eyes turned red. He was evolving early. The void light from the future was trying to manifest through the temporal weakness. Strange realized that the warning message had created a bridge. By sending information back, they had also opened a door for the entity. The nightmare was happening again right here in the police station. Strange knew he could not fight this with force. He had tried that in the future and died. He needed to change the rules of the engagement. He looked to the chief of police, who was struggling against the red bands. Strange released him. Chief Yagami fell to the floor looking at his son, who was now floating surrounded by a black aura. The chief cried out Light's name. Light looked down. His face was cold, devoid of humanity. He raised his hand, pointing a finger at his own father. He was going to kill the only man who still believed in him to prove his transcendence. Strange acted. He did not save the chief. He stepped into the line of fire. But he did not put up a shield. He opened the eye of Agamotto completely. He exposed the time stone. He held the infinity stone up to the Shinigami eyes of Light Yagami. He offered the stone to the gaze of the death god. Light looked into the stone. He saw time. He saw the birth of stars. He saw the heat death of the universe, and he saw his own lifespan. But because he was looking at the time stone which existed outside of linear time, his lifespan was not a number. It was an infinity symbol. The Shinigami eyes could not process it. The logic of the Death Note required a finite value to execute the kill. When the absolute finite met the absolute infinite, the system crashed. Light screamed, clutching his head. Blood poured from his eyes. The black aura flickered. The connection to the void entity was destabilized. He fell to the ground, writhing in agony. The paradox was burning his mind. Strange collapsed, gasping. The use of the stone as a mirror had nearly blinded him. L stood up. He picked up the gun that Chief Yagami had dropped. He walked over to Light, who was curled up on the floor, blinding and screaming. L aimed the gun. This was the moment, the execution, the solution. But L hesitated. He was a detective. He believed in law. Even now, after everything, he struggled with the act of murder. Ryuk watched from the cabinet. He saw the hesitation. He saw the mess. He saw the loops and the paradoxes and the screaming. He sighed. He said that this was not fun anymore. He said it was too complicated. He said he was tired. Ryuk reached into his back pouch. He pulled out his own death note. He opened it. He picked up his pen. Light heard the sound of the pen cap clicking. He stopped screaming. He froze. He knew that sound. He turned his bleeding head toward the Shinigami. He whispered Ryuk's name. He begged. He said he could still win. He said he could still be the god. Ryuk looked at him with big yellow eyes that held no pity, only a detached amusement that had run its course. Ryuk said that Light had lost the moment he tried to be something other than human. He said that gods don't beg. Ryuk wrote. He wrote slowly, enjoying the strokes. Light Yagami. Light stared at the book. He tried to lunge for it, but his body failed him. The heart attack hit him like a sledgehammer. It was not the instant death he had given to criminals. It was slow, painful, a crushing weight in his chest that felt like the entire world pressing down on him. He clawed at the floor. He looked at his father. He looked at L. He looked at Strange. He tried to speak, but only blood came out. He rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling of the police station. The light in his eyes faded. The red glow vanished. The black aura evaporated. He was just a boy dying on a linoleum floor. Silence fell over the room. The police officers were released from the bands. They stood in shock, looking at the body of the chief's son. Chief Yagami fell to his knees weeping, not for the monster, but for the child he thought he knew. But the story did not end with the death of the villain. The convergence of the universes had a cost. The energy that Light had summoned the void entity did not just disappear. It had been pulled into this reality, and now it had nowhere to go. It began to leak into the room. The walls started to rot. The floor began to turn to dust. The death curse was looking for a new host. It swirled around L. It sensed his intellect, his drive, his capacity for ruthlessness. Strange saw the danger. He knew that if L took the book, if L became the new Kira, he would be even more effective than Light. A Kira without an ego. A Kira of pure logic. The world would become a prison. Strange knew he had to pay the price. He had brought his magic into a world that couldn't support it. He had broken the timeline. He had to fix it. Strange stood up. He walked into the center of the swirling black energy. He opened his cloak. He invited the curse in. He did not try to control it. He tried to contain it. He offered himself as the prison. The black mist rushed into him, filling his pores, turning his veins black. Strange screamed a sound of pure spiritual agony. as the death energy fought with the mystic energy of the Vishanti inside his body. El shouted at him to stop. He realized what Strange was doing. Strange was becoming the scapegoat. Strange looked at El one last time. His eyes were no longer human. One was green, the other was the red of the Shinigami. Strange spoke, his voice sounding like grinding stones. He told El to burn the notebook. He told him to never speak of this. He told him that the world needed a detective, not a wizard. Strange began to levitate. The reality around him warped. He was too dangerous to stay in this dimension. He was a living weapon of mass destruction. He began to cast a final spell, not a portal to Earth, 616. He was too corrupted to go home. He would infect his own universe. He cast a portal to the space between spaces, to the dark dimension, to a place where he could fight demons forever, where his corruption would not hurt innocence. The portal opened a swirling vortex of purple and black. Strange drifted toward it. The chief of police watched in awe. El watched in sorrow. Ryuk watched in respect. Strange entered the portal. As he crossed the threshold, he looked back. He didn't smile. He simply nodded. The portal closed. The black mist vanished with him. The rot stopped spreading. The room was just a room again. The aftermath was a quiet devastation. Light Yagami was dead. The notebook was sitting on the floor, a black, innocuous thing. El walked over to it. He picked it up. He did not open it. He walked to the trash can in the corner of the room. He took a lighter from his pocket. He lit the corner of the book. He watched it burn. The paper screamed as it burned, a high, thin sound that made the officers cover their ears. But El did not look away. He watched until it was nothing but ash. The file on the desk of the man known as El was thinner than any other case file in his career. It was labeled simply with the letter X. It contained no photographs because every digital image taken of the Sorcerer Supreme had corrupted into static, and every physical photo had faded to white. The universe was healing itself by forgetting the intruder. It was scrubbing Stephen Strange from its memory, like a body pushing out a splinter. El sat in his chair with his knees pulled to his chest. He was eating a piece of dark chocolate. The taste was bitter. He usually preferred sweets, but he felt that he no longer deserved them. The world outside had returned to its noisy, chaotic state. The crime rate in Japan had spiked by 40% in 6 months. Murders and robberies filled the news cycle again. To the public, this was a crisis. To El, it was a relief. The silence of the graveyard was gone, replaced by the messy, loud noise of human free will. He watched the screens. He saw the police struggling. He saw the courts backed up. He saw the imperfection of the system. He did not try to fix it all at once. He just watched. Chief Yagami had retired from the force. He spent his days in a small garden he had planted behind his house. He grew white roses. He never spoke of light. He never spoke of the notebook. He simply watered the flowers and stared at the empty space where his son used to stand. The grief was a quiet fog that never lifted. In the hospitals, the doctors, who had survived the hostage crisis, worked with a different kind of focus. They had seen magic. They had seen death walk the halls. They treated every patient with a desperate intensity, knowing that life was not a guarantee, but a fragile privilege that could be snatched away by a writer in the dark. The city of Tokyo carried a scar that could not be seen on any map. There were certain street corners where people walked faster without knowing why. There were alleys that cats refused to enter. The tear in the sky had sealed, but the fabric was thin. In a dimension that defied the laws of physics, Stephen Strange sat on a rock floating in a sea of purple fire. He was not the ruler here. He was the jailer. The dark dimension was a swirling storm of hungry shadows. Strange held a sword formed from his own hardened magic. His face was pale and his eyes were dark and hollow. He was tired. He had been fighting for what felt like 1,000 years, though only months had passed on Earth. He did not remember the taste of tea or the sound of music. He only remembered the mission. He watched the borders of the reality he had left behind. He saw Elle eating chocolate. He saw the chief watering roses. He saw the world spinning. Strange tightened his grip on the sword. A demon the size of a building rose from the fire, screaming a challenge. Strange stood up. He did not use the time stone. He did not use the eye. He used his will. He swung the sword. He was the wall that stood between the light and the dark, and he would not move. Ryuk sat on a billboard overlooking the Shibuya crossing. He finished his apple. He tossed the core down into the crowd. It hit a businessman on the head. The man looked up angry, but saw nothing but the night sky. Ryuk spread his wings. He was bored again. But it was a different kind of boredom. It was the boredom of a spectator who had seen the best play of the century and knew that the encore would never match the original performance. He decided to sleep. He faded into the grey mist, waiting for the next time humanity decided to break the rules. The world continued to spin, a fragile blue marble held together by sacrifice and secrets.